Good morning readers, it's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and today I'm going to be doing the My Neck of the Woods tag, which was created by Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading. This is not a tag that I have been tagged to do, and yes, I should be doing the tags that I have been tagged in first, but I was just really tempted by this tag. When I went home over Christmas, I was thinking about all of the books that have been written in my local area, and I just wanted to share them with you. And I've seen Kelly encouraging other people to do the tag recently, so I just thought that I would go ahead and give it a go. I am using a script today, so I will be doing my slightly scripty phase, and that's just because I don't want to forget any of the authors that I want to mention. So the tag is very simple. It's just to identify your neck of the woods, which is up to you to define, so you could choose your entire country or just a very small local area, which is what I'm going to be doing. Share 5 books from that area and tag some people, so here goes. I currently live in Yorkshire, and Yorkshire has a fair few claims to literary fame, most notably the Bronte sisters. But even after 5 years living here, I don't feel like I have the same close, earthy connection to Yorkshire as I do to the place where I grew up. There is also a slightly funny dynamic in England between the north and the south, and people from Yorkshire in particular are very proud of being from Yorkshire. Fairly, I suppose. And I think they would be angry with me for claiming any of their authors for my own, so I'm not going to do that. I was born and raised in Sussex, which is a smaller county in England right down on the south coast, directly down from London. It's a county geographically defined by beautiful chalky downland and valleys in between those downs. Downs, by the way, being another word for hills. And the coast features these iconic cliffs. Dover is in the next county of Kent, so if you've heard of the song There'll Be Bluebirds Over the White Cliffs of Dover, you've got the general idea. Most images of the White Cliffs are actually these, which are the Seven Sisters and Beachy Head, because let's face it, Sussex is just better than Kent anyway. In fact, the whole of these areas used to be what was called an area of outstanding natural beauty. A Canadian friend of ours who came to visit last year saw this on a map and just had a good old laugh about how that is just ridiculous bragging about our countryside. But we like to brag when we've got something pretty. That area of outstanding natural beauty has since been turned into England's newest national park, which you can explore by walking the 100 miles of the South Downs Way. I haven't done so myself, but I have walked bits and pieces of it. To give you an idea of some of the loveliness of Sussex, we have 2 pictures in our house that originally belonged to my grandfather, and they were given to me by my step-grandmother when she knew that we were getting a house. So they are prints of works by Susan Jakeman, and this one shows the meandering river Cuckmere on its way out to the sea, and this one shows Firle Beacon, which is one of the highest of the downs. So I have them to remind me of home, and I think they just really fit quite nicely with our house. My city, Brighton Hove, is about an hour from the capital by train, and it is famous for being a bit of a party town through the ages. There is a kind of idea of it being a town of loose morals where people came to indulge in a bit of sea bathing, and maybe also some other things were frowned upon elsewhere. If you have read Pride and Prejudice, then yes, this is the same Brighton where a certain young Miss Bennet decides to renounce her maiden name, perhaps a little prematurely. To this day, although Brighton is a town that struggles with a lot of homelessness, a lot of social inequality and areas of economic deprivation, it has a reputation of being this kind of laid-back, happy, party town, an artsy place with a great gay scene where you can go to let your hair down, maybe do a cheap hen do, or just have a beach trip from the city on a sunny day. And there is definitely truth on both sides of that. Currently we're the only city in England to have a Green MP, Caroline Lucas, who has remained very popular throughout some turbulent times in UK politics. But we also, for more than a decade up to 2017, were apparently in the top 10 cities for deaths related to drugs, which for a small city is quite concerning. But we're not here to talk about social issues, we're here to talk about books. I think most of the authors, or at least the stories that I'm going to mention today, will be familiar to a lot of people. I haven't hunted out any obscure names for this tag at all, but I thought it would be nice to maybe show you some of the authors that you may know already that had a strong connection with Sussex. For my first author, I want to head back out into those chalk downs that I mentioned earlier and tell you a bit of a poem about them by one Rudyard Kipling. Kipling is of course far more famous for creating the Jungle Book. And in recent years he has gained a little bit of notoriety for being a very dodgy colonialist. He was born in Bombay, as it says on the back of this copy of the Just So stories, and he spent much of his life in and around India. I read his poem The White Man's Burden for Victober this year, and I kind of didn't want to because I knew it would sadden me and make me feel all conflicted about Kipling, which it definitely did. However, today I'd like to leave all that aside and talk about his work on Sussex. From 1902 to 1936, Kipling lived in a fancy old pile called Bateman's that is now owned by the National Trust, so you can go and visit it if you happen to be in that neck of the woods. In the year that he moved to Bateman's, he wrote the poem Sussex, which is a hearty 12 verses all about just how much he loves the county. I don't have a physical copy of this poem here, but I will link below to a site that you can read it, and I will tell you just the kind of chorus now. God gives all men all earth to love, but since man's heart is small, ordains for each one spot shall prove beloved over all. Each to his choice, and I rejoice, the lot has fallen me. In a fair ground, yea, Sussex by the sea. Now this has got a strong religious element to it, particularly in the chorus, but I broadly choose to ignore that. This poem has a lot of personal resonance to me because my dad's family is from Sussex going back a few generations, and when my grandfather passed away, we each read part of this poem when we went up onto the downs to scatter his ashes. And by doing that, we all learnt bits of the poem quite well. We used to spend a lot of time out walking in the Sussex Downs. My mum would drag us all out every Sunday to do like a 10-mile walk with a pub lunch and things like that. And as we were walking in the hills, and even up to today, if we're out and about in the countryside, there are certain lines that we will always tend to reference. So we'll get to a beautiful view and talk about the wooded, dim blue goodness of the Weald, which is the big vale on the inland side of the downs. Or we'll look at a wind-bent tree and call it a gnarled and writhen thorn. The other thing that Steve, my dad, would not forgive me if I didn't mention here is football. And for all you Americans out there, this is the football that I mean. So the refrain Sussex by the Sea was also used in another poem in 1907, which became apparently a kind of a county anthem, and it has long since been taken up by Brighton and Hove Albion, our football team, who are currently in the Premier League. Seagulls, seagulls! And I believe that the chant is something along the lines of, good old Sussex by the sea, good old Sussex by the sea, we're going up to win the cup in Sussex by the sea. Yeah. Did I do a good job of pretending to be a football hooligan? I didn't really, did I? One of the Sussex places mentioned in Kipling's poem is the Ouse, which is a river. Ouse is a river name that crops up in more than one place in England because etymologically, that is a complicated word. The word apparently links back to a Celtic word for water, but this particular river Ouse in Sussex has a bit of a tragic claim to fame in that it is the river in which the wonderful author and essayist Virginia Woolf took her own life in 1941. I've mentioned previously that Virginia Woolf is really one of my top authors. She is renowned for her stunning non-fiction works, such as A Room of One's Own, her moving fiction in which she developed the technique of stream of consciousness writing, which became so characteristic of that period, and for being a part of the Bloomsbury group with her husband, sister and friends. Woolf began frequently staying in Sussex before the First World War. In 1919, she and her husband bought the lovely cottage, the Monk's House, which again is now under the National Trust. They moved there permanently in 1940 after they were bombed out of London, and although there is not a huge amount of Sussex in Woolf's works, when you visit the house you can really see the time and care that was put into creating a very personal, cosy home there. And it's thought that works like Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse and Orlando were all worked on sitting in a wooden lodge in the garden with views across to the green top of Mount Cavan. And I will try to insert here a picture of Mount Cavan that my parents have in their front room. On a happier note, another author who drew inspiration from the gorgeous Sussex countryside was the beloved A.A. Milne. Even if you are not familiar with that name, I'm sure many of you will recognise Milne's creations, such as Piglet, Tigger, Eeyore, and of course, Winnie the Pooh. These characters were based on toys that belonged to the real-life Christopher Robin, Milne's son, and the 100-acre wood was taken nearly directly from Ashdown Forest, where I am sure I went on many picnics as a child. Milne apparently got quite frustrated with the success of Winnie the Pooh and the impact that it had on his writing because he tried to write a lot of other things, and also the impact that it had on his son. I guess he just didn't realise how popular his creations would be with so many children. Moving from the countryside back into the city, we enter the gritty and atmospheric underbelly of Brighton with Graham Greene's 1938 story Brighton Rock. Now, as anyone who has spent summer days in cheap British seaside sweet shops will know, Rock is a sugary confectionery which normally says the name of the place that it comes from on the end. As you work your way down through the sweet, the name stays the same. There are no hidden depths to a stick of rock, and supposedly the same is true for Greene's youthful but brutal anti-hero Pinky. This is a very dark book that delves into a world of gang violence that apparently existed beneath Brighton's tourist-friendly veneer. But it also brings in themes of religion and manipulative relationships, and I do remember finding it quite thrilling. If you want to see Brighton on film, this book was adapted into a movie relatively recently, in 2010 I believe, although I haven't seen it myself. But instead of the 1930s setting, the filmmakers transplanted the story into another iconic moment in the history of Brighton, the 1964 period of conflict between the mods and the rockers. Another film that deals with this is Quadrophenia. This is still a very well-known moment in Brighton's history, and one of the moments that people outside of Brighton are more likely to have heard of. My next book is set primarily in London, but it was written by an author who was born and brought up in Sussex, and that is Patrick Hamilton's Hangover Square from 1941. I read this book for a book group at college, and before that I hadn't heard of it at all, but it is a 20th century classic. Hangover Square is again a very bleak novel with perhaps a questionable take on themes of mental health and alcoholism, so consider that your warning if you are going to pick it up. But I really enjoyed the characters and the world that Hamilton created here. At one point in the book, the characters do travel down to Brighton and stay in a dodgy hotel, and there is a bit of promiscuous behaviour, so again, we're going back to Brighton's slightly seedy reputation. Every year, Brighton hosts its own little rival to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and a couple of years ago, one of the events that I sadly missed was a recreation of that hotel room in Brighton, which I think was a very nice and fitting idea. For some honourable mentions today, I have got two poets. Firstly, Shelley, who was born in Sussex but seems to have left long before he did any writing. And secondly, William Blake. William Blake lived in London for most of his life, but in what you might notice is a bit of a theme to these authors. He did spend some time away from the bustle of the city between 1800 and 1803, and of course he chose to come to Sussex. He based himself near another National Trust property, the very impressive Petworth House, which recently hosted a fascinating exhibition of his work. So he's not a poet that I can pretend to have read an awful lot of, but at that exhibition there was a lot of his very fascinating and eccentric artwork on display. Blake is just one of those weird and wonderful historical characters who is too often neglected, but he had a unique view of the world, and one that wasn't always strictly very close to reality. While he was in Sussex, Blake wrote perhaps his most familiar work, although it's not a work that many people would automatically link to him, and that is "And did those feet in ancient times walk on England's mountains green," which we now know as the hymn or anthem Jerusalem. When looked at in the light of Blake's other works, to me at least, that poem takes on quite a different atmosphere to the one we're used to seeing. While we're straying a little bit into art, I just can't resist indulging you all with another little bit of Turner. As those of you who were around during Booktober will know, I do love JMW Turner, and happily he also has connections to Petworth. A few years after William Blake, he painted this gorgeous picture of the house, and later he went to Brighton as well and painted this lovely, calming picture of the sea and the newly built chain pier, which sadly no longer exists. So there you have it, that is my neck of the woods. This has been lovely to make, it has felt very personal, and to be honest, it has made me a little bit homesick. But never mind, it's time to tag some people. For the last tag that I did, I passed the tag on to 5 people who had recently done the BookTube Newbie Tag. I really liked doing that because it felt like a nice way to welcome a few people into the community. And through doing it, I found the wonderful Chrissy of the Return Cart, whose videos I have been really enjoying lately. So hopefully I will find some more new people to watch by doing the same again. I think this could be great to do as a newbie because it gives you the chance to introduce yourself a little bit more by talking about where you are from, even if you don't have any specific favourite authors from nearby. And remember, you can expand your neck of the woods to take in any authors that you particularly like from your country, for example. I also tagged Alba from the channel Seriella. She has already been telling us about some favourite authors from Puerto Rico, but I just thought I would give her another excuse to do that because I'm so happy to see her making her own videos. So that makes 5 people then. So thank you to Kelly for creating this tag, thank you to you for watching, and please do tell me a bit about your neck of the woods and any interesting literary facts from around there in the comments. Happy reading, and I will speak to you soon.